It's time for Straight Talk Live with renowned radio pioneer Edna Howell-Parrish, the television show and podcast dedicated to presenting thought-provoking issues and opinions with the goal of challenging listeners to re-examine their assumptions and expand their opinions and give thought to new ideas and concepts to better their lives and the lives of others. This is your opportunity to participate in making the world better. So without further ado, let's get ready for Straight Talk Live with your host Edna Howell-Parrish.
Today on Issues and Opinions, we begin a series entitled Family Reunion. We are more than who we look like. So who do you think you are? Our goal is to learn and understand how to explore, how to research, and how to strengthen our bonds as families to create belonging and create lifelong memories. Today we start with what is no longer a myth. In post-Civil War days, it was very common for white men to basically have two wives, the legal white wife and the common law black wife, who he impregnated and fathered many mixed-race children with. This went on throughout slavery and Jim Crow. Now, I've known people well who had multiple ancestors like that. In fact, my own family had relatives in that area. Our guest today knows people like that too. He is Shannon Lanier. I've known Shannon since his days as a Cincinnati high school student. Today, he is husband, father, actor, and Emmy Award-winning TV show host and news anchor with the nationally syndicated TV network, Cheddar News and News 12. Shannon's also the co-author of the Random House Incorporated book, Jefferson's Children, the story of one American family, along with photojournalist Jane Feldman. As the sixth great-grandson of President Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, the book follows his journey to unite with other Jefferson descendants, black, white, and everyone in between. So who do you think you are? Good morning, and let's talk. I'm Edna Howell-Parrish, and welcome to Straight Talk Live with Edna. I'm here, you're here. We asked you to join us this morning and be sure to like and share the show. It is so important. Good morning, Shannon. Joining us this morning from Houston, Texas. How you doing, Shannon?
I am great, and I just moved. I'm now in Florida.
No way.
I decided to pack it on up.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I'll say you moved more than I've moved because I have been on the tour of the US, but that's okay. We go where we have to go, do what we have to do.
Yeah, definitely. That's the business, you know.
Shannon, you're from Cincinnati, Ohio, and just a little background for people, wanting people to know a little bit more about you.
All right. So I am, as you know, from Cincinnati, Ohio. Went to Hughes High School, right there, communications profession. Whoop, whoop. Then I left there and went to Kent State University. And from Kent, I went to New York. I was in New York for 15 years. Basically, my career has stemmed in communications, so TV, a little bit of radio. That's where I first met you at the Wiz. I was way back in the day doing some work over there. And the Wiz actually gave me some scholarship money. You presented me with some scholarship money down there when I was there. So the Wiz was good to me. You were great for me and helping me out and giving me advice throughout my career. So, it's just been a blessing to be able to do what I love doing and being on television and working for some of the, biggest networks in the business and, having a nationally syndicated TV shows and internationally syndicated television shows. So it's been a blessing. And then, I had the opportunity to write a book as well. So I co-authored Jefferson's Children, the story of one American family with Jane Feldman. And that was an amazing experience of my life too, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more during this conversation. But now, just as an update, like I said, I'm in Florida and I'm anchoring the news at BNC, which stands for Black News Channel. It's basically content for the Black and Brown community, from the Black and Brown community. So you see everything from, Black to Hispanic to Indian, Asian. We cover the gamut of everyone just to provide an outlet for us to be able to tell our stories, the stories we care about, the stories that matter to us, and tell them from a different perspective that we're not hearing on a lot of the mainstream media. So we got you back at BNC.
Indeed, you're kind of like Cincinnati Digital Media, the only Black social media network in Cincinnati. I want to say the tri-state, Nate, but I don't want to brag too
You want to
quick.
say right,
But
right, right.
nonetheless, Nate provides this platform for Black and Brown people too. So
Mm.
we appreciate him doing that. So today on
Uh,
Straight Talk Live, we kick off Women's History Month with a discussion about Sally Hemings, one of the most talked about but least known African American women in history. And Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, you are their sixth great grandson, Shannon Lanier. Some people say,
mhm.
well, how did that happen, Shannon? You, we don't know Sally Hemings that much about her, but Thomas Jefferson, we know was white. So how could he be your sixth? You could be a sixth great grandson of Thomas
Yeah.
Jefferson,
Now
our
six.
president,
Yeah, and that
former
makes me
president.
ninth generation. I know some people get confused. So I'm ninth generation descendant, but that makes me sixth great because you start counting the greats after my grandfather, then my great grandfather, then stuff like that. So well, actually, great grandmother, but yeah, that's how you count it back.
Now, isn't his wasn't one of his sayings? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, but
Hmm.
somehow it got twisted around with Thomas Jefferson in his explanation of what he meant by that. So, what did he mean when he said that? But yet, and still, he had slaves. He owned slaves.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I try to point out that yes, he did great things for this country, but he was also a slave owner. He owned more than 600 people. So, yeah, he did great things. But let's talk about the whole man. Let's talk about the guy who did all of these things. Don't just highlight the positive things he did. Let's talk about it all. And when he wrote those words, he didn't include, in his mind, he wasn't including black people. He wasn't including slaves. He wasn't even including women. He was speaking about land owning white men at the time. They are created equal. So, it's unfortunate.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's unfortunate that he didn't get it right the first time around, but it's now, a great opportunity. I know my co-author Jane Feldman always says, it's up to us, it's up to the country, the family, everyone to, really unite and live up to those words today and make those words ring true because they've been used now from so many people to speak to equality and for justice for all. So now we can interpret those words and act out the actions of those words, even though he didn't get it right when he was alive.
hmm. What do you think Thomas Jefferson would say today with all this news about him and Sally Hemings, one of his slaves? Would he endorse it? Would he say, "Yeah, I did it"? Or what do you think?
Today, he can't deny it. Back in the day, he didn't technically, back in the day, deny it. He didn't say yes and he didn't say no. He was
Right,
just
right.
mum on the question. So that spoke volumes there that he didn't, even say anything. But, I think the, the facts are out there. It's hard to deny it at this point.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I understand from you, and when the book first came out, Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings, your book. I have my original copy here this
Mm,
morning.
mhm.
Jefferson's Children: The Story of One American Family. How did you know when you told your first or second grade class that Thomas Jefferson was a grandfather of yours? What did how did you find that out?
Well, I always known the story through the oral history of my family. My mother, Priscilla Lanier, still in Cincinnati. She passed it
Shout out.
down to yeah. She passed the story down to my brother Sean and I. So we've had a lot of family members like Patty Joe, Toddy Redmond, Patty Joe's mother, Ann. Just in case anybody's listening, giving them shout outs to my Uncle Jack and his wife, Aunt Jackie. So many people that have work to preserve the story of our family, to do more research about the family, to, even like oral historian Beverly Gray, we tell people to go speak to the most important person, not most important, but the most knowledgeable person in your family that knows this information, and they can give you the breadcrumbs to lead you back to the full story of your family. And for us, a lot of times that was Beverly Gray. She is just an amazing oral historian down in Southern Ohio who preserved the stories of many slaves, but also focused a lot on the Hemmings family. So she told me a lot about my family and where we came from, as I got older. But when I was just a kid, I didn't know much. I just knew that we descend from Jefferson. I didn't know about slavery and as much about Sally. I just, said, oh, okay, Jefferson, he's a president. That's cool. And I took that information to school when I was in second grade. And I told everyone, Thomas Jefferson is my great, 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 great grandfather. And the teacher said, sit down and stop telling lies. Of course, she didn't want to have that information in the class. But, my mother came to school. She corrected the teacher the next day and said, don't tell him he's lying. He is a descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And, I guess she just helped us realize that, we have to believe in who we are and trust our own self-awareness and knowledge about us. Because if you let people tell you who you are, they'll continue to run your life. So it was an important lesson that my mother taught my brother Sean and I at a very young age.
Let's go way back to the beginning. Okay. Sally Hemings, how did she get to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home?
Well, let's start in the very beginning to the first African woman that came over here.
Amen.
Yeah. So she came over here on a slave ship, obviously, and she had children with the captain of that slave ship. And so that was John Hemmings. And then Hemmings was his name, Captain Hemmings. And so out of that, they came Elizabeth. So they had this daughter named Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth became owned by Thomas Jefferson's wife's Martha. Okay. So Thomas Jefferson's wife Martha's father became the owner of Elizabeth. So when he decided he had Elizabeth, he was going to have children with Elizabeth. So now Elizabeth had children with a slave owner who was Thomas Jefferson's wife's father. So that means that Thomas Jefferson's wife and Sally Hemings had the same father, John Wells. So Captain Hemmings, then John Wells, and Elizabeth had a baby. That came Sally and all of Sally's siblings. So again, Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson's wife, Martha, had the same father. Okay. So they had this baby. And when Martha Jefferson's wife, it's still early for me. When Martha Jefferson's dad passed away, Thomas Jefferson inherited all of his slaves. So that's how he got the Hemmings family. And, a lot of people say, Thomas Jefferson wasn't in the practice of buying and selling slaves. He inherited most of his. He still had slaves. He didn't say, I'm going to set you free. He said, no, I'm going to take you and enjoy that free labor. So don't try to clean it up and try to make him a quote unquote good slave owner. I don't know if that exists, but yeah, he wasn't. So we can just stop that there. So that's how she got to Monticello, basically. Long story longer. He inherited her.
So you got one of your 1619 Project stories, the original slave.
Right. I got that book right there, 1619 Project.
Yeah, I got that one too. But you know what? And it's so interesting that Martha Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's wife, and Sally Hemings, they have the same father, same DNA running through their blood. It looks like the father, that fathered Thomas Jefferson's wife and Thomas Jefferson, they had the same inklings of having children with their slaves. And that's what slaves do, is have children for their masters, but not those that they intimately keep with them, and they just become relationship.
Well, it was a common practice at that time where, it was your property. You were owned property, and that's how you create more slaves. And plus, I guess he had his urges and his needs, if you will. And so he continued to do that. And if his mentor was doing it, who was his wife's father and a guy who looked up to, and all his other slave owner friends were doing it as well, why would there be a problem for him to do it as well? Because that was his owned property. And, a lot of people want to know, well, was it a love relationship? What was it? It was, let's make it clear. She was a slave. She did not have a choice. She did not have an option. She was property, and he took advantage of it. A lot of people will say the R word. It comes out. A lot of people would hope to not have their great-great-grandmother raped for 38 years, but seeing how she did not have a choice and there could not be an option for her, that's all we can point to. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I don't know what that relationship was like. Some people say maybe it was Stockholm syndrome. Maybe she was getting the best out of the situation, which was the freedom of her children that she could, because he promised that any children they had together, that he would free them at the age of 21. He upheld that promise, actually freed all of the Hemmings children. So that's testament, again, pointing to the fact that he did father them. But, it was a complicated dynamic between, the country, slave owners, the enslaved people that they had. But I don't think it was love at this point. It was nice to imagine something like that at some point until you start to learn more about the history of this country. Then you're like, yeah, probably not.
And there were so many people in denial about this relationship, these children that were sired by Thomas Jefferson. But it took your family in this oral history to break down the walls and make it more knowledgeable about people to know about this story. Sally Hemings, a mixed race enslaved woman, was a teenager when Thomas Jefferson had gone to France to do some extra work over there. And he sent for one of his daughters, the daughter named Polly, I understand. And he wanted her to have an escort, a helper. And so the family members sent Sally Hemings with her to France. And they go to France and stay for how long?
Oh, they were over there enough time for her to get pregnant, because
Yeah.
and they believe she was learning French at the time, and because she had to escort Jefferson's daughters around. And so if she's escorting his daughters, they're mingling with the fancy folks of France. And she was also paid while she was there. Her and her brother James were there. He was an exquisite chef, and they were being paid because, Jefferson knew slavery was wrong, let's be clear, and he didn't want to seem like the only person that was over here in France with slaves, because there were no slaves. It was outlawed in France at the time. And so he wanted to seem like, oh, these were indentured servants, or they, his employees. So he was paying them to be there at the time. And that's where she first became pregnant with the first child.
Amazing. So she comes back home. She was 14 years old, I think, when she went. She's a teenager. So Thomas Jefferson, that makes him a pedophile, maybe? Yeah.
Well, in today's terminology, yes. But, back then, people were having children with young girls all the time because people died a lot younger. And so, you were a woman in your teenage years. But, yeah, pedophile's another knock to him, as well as rapists. So,
Yeah, and so she had the first baby at the age of 16. Is that correct?
Well, there's some speculation on, she did have it as a teenager, but in Madison's writings, he said that the first baby died after it was born. It died, and some people will say, well, technically she still had the baby, but some people will say that baby grew up to look so much like Jefferson that they got rid of the baby, sent them off to another plantation so he would not be there. So there's still some speculation of what really happened to that first child. There's still a lot of research trying to be done to determine if that child is in fact the Thomas Woodson and the descendants of the Thomas Woodson family, because they have a very strong oral history as well. But we're not sure. Sometimes DNA can be mixed up because, years ago, if, somebody had a baby or they were too young, then sometimes they gave them to other family members and you raised them and they raised them. Or they say, okay, we want you to live in a safer environment, so you're going to go up north and live with so-and-so, and they take you on as their child. So that could have been one of the reasons why the DNA has not linked up for the Thomas Woodson side of the family. But they did use the DNA to prove the Madison and Eston lines of the family, and then Harriet and Beverly lines of the family are also assumed to be Jefferson's as well, because of the timing, the oral history, the documentation, all the things that point at them all as children, as well as Madison Hemmings' writings where he said that they had those children. But Beverly and Harriet, they were allowed again to run away because Jefferson freed them at the age of 21. And so they passed for white. And so a lot of times we're still looking for a lot of those descendants, and they may not know who they are because their family has been passing for whites since the 1800s. So it's like, we don't know where they are, and they may not know who they are. So that's the unfortunate
Mm.
aspect about passing when you start talking about that, irrevocable decision to pass, or when some people are made to pass for safety, for protection, education. So many things are done to protect people's identity and to keep them alive. So unfortunately, we still don't know where a lot of the Harriet and Beverly descendants are.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Straight Talk Live. Once again, we're talking this morning with Shannon Lanier. He is the sixth great grandson of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Women's History Month. Sally Hemings gets a lot of credit for being his so-called concubine, mistress.
Mhm.
Did she have a choice of she wanted to be?
No, she was a slave. It was no choice. You know, I was not there. I don't know if she had definitely had some more influence and power on the plantation because she was a Sally Hemings, because she was a Hemings family member in general. The matriarch of the family, Elizabeth, was there running things probably, but still they were slaves. So we have to put that in perspective as well.
So, did she live in on Slave Row, or did she have a special place that she lived?
Well,
I understand
Mulberry
that.
Row. Oh, so I was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
Mulberry Row was where a lot of the slaves worked or lived. And she had a place inside the house. It was connected to the house, should say. They've just unveiled it at Monticello now. Monticello's been doing an amazing job restoring the plantation to what it would have looked like when Jefferson was alive. And so, what used to be a tourist bathroom is where they've discovered remnants of what would have possibly been Sally Hemings's room. So now they've unveiled it. They have it as an exhibit now where you can walk through it. It's not much there because we don't know as much about Sally Hemings, unfortunately. But what we do know is displayed there at that room, which is sort of like under the house. There's like tunnels and things, and so the slaves can move around without being seen. And so as part of that, next to the kitchen is where Sally Hemings's room was.
Hmm.
So there was easy access to get in and out the house without a lot of people seeing you.
Amazing, amazing. Shannon Lanier is our guest, and if you like the show, be sure to like and share, and be sure to check in with us this morning. And if you have a question for Shannon, be sure to check in with us on Facebook Live. We're on with Shannon Lanier this morning on Straight Talk Live. So be sure to like and share. Good morning, everyone, says Jeannie. Brenda Early is checking in this morning. One of your old high school and college brothers, Christian Boykin, checking
Hey,
in this morning. Yeah, with
hey.
you. Yeah.
Awesome. Good to
So
see all. Good to hear from all my Cincinnati folks and all my college folks. Thank y'all for tuning in. Appreciate y'all. All nice
oh, well,
comments. Thank you.
thank you so much. How many children in all does Sally Hemings have?
7.
Seven
So she
children.
had 7, yeah. And then right now we can track that we know that again the Thomas Woodson line of the family, which we mentioned earlier, but I'm from the Madison line, which was the second to last, and the Eston line of the family is the last. The Eston line is the one that they used to find out the DNA link between Jefferson and the Hemings family, and so we know a lot of them. And then the Beverly and Harriet lines, a lot less of them are known. And then they had children that also died at very young ages or in infancy. So, but we still count them.
Okay, so Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson were connected for how many years?
38 years.
38 years.
Yeah.
And so, what did she do after, I guess, that relationship ended?
Well, after
Run?
he died,
Yeah.
his daughters freed Sally Hemings, and she was allowed to live in Charlottesville, Virginia, not far from UVA, down at the bottom of the hill. She lived there with her sons, Madison and Eston, until she died. And then Madison and Eston moved to southern Ohio in a place called Chillicothe. If
Oh,
any
yeah.
Ohio folks out there, you should know Chillicothe is the first and third capital of Ohio. And so she moved to that area right outside of Chillicothe. And I still have, that's why my mother was born in Chillicothe,
Oh,
and
really?
we
Okay.
have a lot of family out there. And it was interesting because Eston found out that he could not make as great a living as he wanted to. Now, mind you, Jefferson trained all the Hemmings kids. He made sure they had a trade so they would be able to fend for themselves once he set them free, once they were able to be on their own, that they would be able to survive. And so they were trained with the best trades and the best skills out there. And Eston said, I have all this talent, but I'm still living as a black man, but looking like a white man. So why not pass for white? So that's when Eston decided to move to Madison, Wisconsin, pass as a white man, and he became a very successful entrepreneur, inventor, and different things that he did with his life. But he also buried his later generations, and his family said, we're going to take this secret to the grave and not reveal to anyone else that we are actually black. We're just going to say we're white. We're going to keep it moving. So my cousin Julia Jefferson was staring him, grew up her entire life thinking she was white until she was in her 40s and got a knock on the door and said, actually, you're not who you think you are. So, and that's when she found out that she had black ancestry linked to Sally Hemings, and her life changed forever. But she's been an amazing member of the family to embrace all of her new heritage and everything that she's learned along the way. Madison, my ancestor, stayed in Ohio, stayed living as a black man, and, raised children and family members to, know their heritage, which is why my family knows so much about the oral history of our family as well.
Now, we have some photos that we're going to share. And I understand there was no photos or portraits of Sally Hemings ever taken. So what we show is
that we know of.
That you know of, yeah.
Yeah.
They sort of bring some pictures up that possibly they say she could have looked like this. One man says she was pretty near white, so she probably had a great look and beauty. Thomas Jefferson fell in love with her, I guess, maybe.
Well, you got to think, she was very beautiful. A lot of accounts did say that how beautiful she was, that she was might near white with long black flowing hair. They also account that she probably looked like his wife. So if your wife passed away in childbirth and then comes along her half sister that probably looks like her but is a lot younger than her, where would why wouldn't he try to link up with that? So that's apparently what happened. Sally Hemings came along after the death of his wife, and that's when he hooked up with her.
Interesting. I understand. Now these are some of your relatives that are on the screen now. Describe who these people are.
So Julia Jefferson was staring on the top left, who was the woman I just mentioned and told you about her family. Down in front of her on the left is Shay Banks Young. That's Mama Shay, we call her. She's part of the Madison descendants family. And she was one of the matriarchs of our family, just very upfront, outspoken, and just a wonderful person, as is Julia. And they actually went on a tour together speaking about, race relations and talking about how their lives are unique and different growing up, one growing up white, another growing up black, but part of the same family. So they had interesting dynamics. Unfortunately, Mama Shay has gone on to her resting place now, but the other family members here, you see Julia's daughter is in the far right corner in the front row. That's Dorothy. And then next to Dorothy is Connie Richardson, as part of the Woodson family, and two of Connie's daughters are in the picture, one behind her and one to her left. Well, her right, my left. So it's and they're with one of the playwrights who did a play about Sally Hemings, Sandra Seaton. But just more family members, amazing people. And that's one of the great things that, have been fun for us, is just getting to know each other, getting to know a family that we didn't know before, getting to realize that we are, much more alike regardless of our color than we are different. And so that we have this connected history. And if you ever go to a black family reunion, you're going to see the colors of the rainbow there. It's just how it is in our families,
Yes. So it's interesting that our oral history is so important and has been important to us throughout our lifestyle, because we didn't have a lot of information. So we had to use that oral history.
And we couldn't write things down a lot of times. Don't forget, a lot of people couldn't read, they couldn't write because they were slaves. So they had no choice but to keep the oral history alive and tell these stories by fireside or whenever they could, or eventually start writing them in the Bibles.
Indeed. Bibles are important to write down information. And if you think that you have a link, it's best to find a geologist and somebody who can tell you, or start asking questions, like you said, different people in your family, not necessarily.
Right.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say you're right, because a lot of times people, again, don't know where to start. They got 23andMe, you have You have your family members. Start there with easy things you can do.
Indeed. Um, Ashley Jones, who is a poet, she wrote this poem about Sally Hemings. I don't know if you've ever seen it or read it. It says what it means to say Sally Hemings' name. What it means to say her name. Bright girl Sally, mulatto Sally, well-dressed Sally, Sally with the pretty hair, Sally with the Irish cotton dress, Sally with the smallpox vaccine, Sally smelling clean with white soap, Sally never farmed a day in her life, available Sally, nursemaid Sally, Sally filled with milk, Sally gone to Paris with master's daughter, Sally in the chamber with the president, Sally in the chamber with the president's brother, illiterate Sally, capable Sally, unmarried Sally, Sally, mother of Madison Harriet Beverly Easton, Sally, mother of Eston Easton, who caught his name, who changed his name, that is. Sally, mother of Easton Hemmings Jefferson, Easton who made cabinets, Easton who made music, Easton who moved to Wisconsin, Easton whose children were Jeffersons, Easton who died a white man, grandmother Sally of the White Hemmings, infamous Sally, silent Sally, Sally kept at Monticello until Jefferson's death, Sally whose children were freed without her. It was written by Ashley M. Jones. And so she said as she wrote this, she said she felt all of it because it was so important. And she said in her book that she wrote, Magic City Gospel, she wrote it because she wanted to tell Sally's story, but because she invoked the spirit of a Black woman who always brings me peace and power. And Sally is one such woman, she said. Mm. All that she said about Sally, were all those things true as you think about them?
Well, I've never heard anything about and don't believe there's any information about her being in the chambers with his brother. So that's not
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not true. There was a lot of speculation after, the DNA where they try to blame anybody. So before the DNA came out, the only person or the people that the Jefferson family tried to say that Jefferson had children with was his wife. And they said that Sally had children with the Carr cousins. It had to be the Carr cousins. It had to be the Carr cousins for years. That's the only people they tried to blame it on. They had to be the Carr cousins. Well, the DNA proved 100% it was not the Carr cousins.
Yes,
so then after that, they tried to find anyone and everyone they could to blame it on and say, oh, it could have been the milkman, his brother, all these other people. I'm like, well, no, it was the Jefferson was at Monticello every time that Sally Hemings conceived. He was only Jefferson at Monticello every time she conceived. There was just so much information and details, the oral history, the DNA that linked Jefferson to Sally Hemings and Sally Hemings' children. So that part I don't know. I'm also not sure about the farming a day in her life part. I'll have to find out about that research, but I'm sure she took her writer's liberties in some areas and being creative and writing her writing.
So Thomas Jefferson's DNA and the strength of his look, it runs straight through your all's family. In fact, the Smithsonian did a feature and they had you dressed like Thomas Jefferson. What a remarkable resemblance there was. I mean, we have a picture of that.
Well, I never thought I looked like Jefferson. And then they did this. And I was like, when you see it, especially they did this morphing thing where they start with his face and then my face bleeds through and you start to see my face full on. And that's what the one that really was more shocking to see with your eyes. I have it on my social media. If you go to Mr. Shannon Lanier on Instagram or TikTok, you can see it there and you can really start to see. I'm like, oh, wow, there is some resemblance there.
And you look at the people in your family, your cousins and relatives.
Oh,
those pictures, that profile, that nose, you all really resemble him a lot.
Yeah, especially the ones that were just like 2 and 3 or 4 generations removed. I'm like, whoa, even the women, the striking bone structure that he had, they still had. You can see those in the book. We talk about Jefferson's Children, the story of one American family. In the book, you can see a lot of the bone structures in some of these people that I'm like, wow, like, yeah, I see what you're saying here with some of these people. So it's kind of cool when you go through the book and see it firsthand with your own eyes.
What was it like for the first time you went to Monticello?
It was amazing. I went, it's just so beautiful there. I went in about 1999 when Lucian K. Truscott invited the family members on Oprah down together to be at this family reunion, and it was just magical down there. Oh wait, no, I went down there once before that, I think. But it still was a magical place because it's just beautiful hills. The sunset down there is magical. But you can't help think, what your ancestors went through and what they have thought it was beautiful, because they was the one making it beautiful. They were the ones slaving away from sun up to sundown, putting in their blood, sweat, and tears to make it possible. So, it's bittersweet, but it's also nice to have a connection to a place, even though if it comes with horrible, bad memories, the fact that you have a connection to something, that you can touch it, you can see it, and you can, have some pride about all your family went through, that they were able to be so inventive, that they built Monticello. So when you talk about these people that were enslaved, they were amazing architects and designers and craftsmen. They had skills. It's not that they were just picking cotton all the day. They were very smart, intelligent. They were great chefs. And, I just think, not enough credit is given to the slaves that built this country. Let's be honest. This country would not be here, would not be what it was without the slaves.
Indeed, I was going to say, I know Thomas Jefferson himself was a very creative man, in terms of his architect and design abilities. But the slaves only, I mean, how many years removed from slavery would that have been when they made all these monuments and buildings? We hadn't been out of slavery they were still in slavery, and they still learned. How did they know? Our people are so creative. How did they know how to do all these great things? How did we know?
A lot of times they were taking skills that they were just picking up from, working on plantations. And sometimes they would have, people teach them. I know Jefferson took some people over to Paris and they learned skills, and they brought those skills back. We good. We see it one time, like, okay, I got it. Just those natural talent. And that's why it's so annoying when people say, slaves or black people were dumb and stuff like that. I'm like, no, they were not. They were very smart, very intellectual, very skilled at what they did. So, just look around this country, and that's the proof.
Indeed, I was reading in some material the other day, and it was saying that perhaps Sally Hemings should have been the first lady when Thomas Jefferson became president. She was with him longer than his wife was. She wasn't with him when he became president, but
right,
they were still together, whatever they would call that relationship.
Yeah. She was still owned. That's what it was. Yeah, she was still owned by him. Yeah.
What about monuments and tributes to Thomas Jefferson? A lot of people, around the country, taking down statues. Do you think Thomas Jefferson's memorial should still stand? Should it be changed? Should it be taken down?
I think, it's complicated in some areas, but I think that if we're going to keep up a statue of Jefferson, it has to be more educational. A lot of these statues, for example, the Confederates, they need to go and, museums or somewhere, educational institutions. They don't need to be in public places where people can feel like they are being, looked down upon and downtrodden, because, a lot of these statues were put up to put people in their place. This Confederate flag statues at least were. And Jefferson is a little bit different in the way that he's being put up and what they're celebrating about him. But I think if they're going to keep them, then they need to put some context to it. They need to mention the full person of who he was, and he was a slave owner who owned over 600 people. Yes, he was also a president, but we need to start telling the full story of these people and put some context in, and not just content up. We need to put context to what it was, who these people were, what they did, so people can learn about them. I don't think we should erase the history of this country, but we need to start telling the true story and not just his story. And that's the problem we've been coming into, where people just put up these statues and like, oh, they're just worship them, they're icons. Like, no, they're not. And no, they don't need to be worshiped. They're human people. They're human beings, and they need to be held accountable for the horrible actions that they did, as well as the good things that they did for this country. So if it's not put into context, and if people in that community feel like that it is berating them, or that they are feel. I mean, they're taxpayers. So as a taxpayer, if I feel like something is making me uncomfortable or disgracing my heritage or my people, then yeah, it should be removed. So that's what if people really feel that way.
Story is out. Everybody knows. Not everybody still doesn't believe, but DNA proves that there is the linkage with Thomas Jefferson and the family. Um, where do you think you'll go to? What will happen to this next moment in time with Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings, and the story?
Well, I think people will continue to research, continue to find out more. Hopefully, we'll continue to, look for photos or paintings of her. Monticello is doing a lot to, again, restore what Monticello looked like during Jefferson's time. They're finding more and more information. The archaeologists are digging up more stuff, finding more things that can help tell the story of what Monticello was like. Because, 50, 60 years ago, they act like Jefferson was the only one that lived there and he built Monticello himself. I'm like, no, that's not true. So yeah, now they're telling the full story. So places like Monticello, I think, are great places for Jefferson's statue to be. Places like UVA, great place for Jefferson's statue to be because they are telling the full story. They're embracing the whole man because he was a complex man who was very conflicted, and he had two faces. This was a man who thought that everyone should be equal and free. He thought that even the slaves should be free, but he didn't free them. He had the opportunity, the power to do it, but he didn't do it. Other people were doing it around him. He didn't do it. He loved politics. He actually hated politics, but he loved shaping a country. He hated public speaking, but he loved writing. So he had all these dualities and all these conflicts going on in his head. So understandably, it was happening in his private life as well. But I hope people will just continue to know the story, to tell the story, because that's why CRT is so important, is because we've been lied to a lot in this country and about our history, about our culture, about what we're supposed to know and not supposed to know. So critical race theory is not here to say, oh, everyone that's white is bad. It's here to say, let's tell the full story of what happened to this country. Let's tell the truth. That's all it's getting to. Christopher Columbus did not discover America, y'all. The Thanksgiving was not just a great festivity to celebrate. There was also a massacre that took place. Let's talk about the truth of our country. Thomas Jefferson had children with an enslaved woman named Sally Hemings. Let's talk about it. Let's deal with it. We can never get to a place of reconciliation and healing unless we first address that these monstrosities actually happened, that this horrific history and tough past to talk about actually occurred in this country. We can't get anywhere until we address it, until we recognize it. Yes, it is fact.
It seems like the closer we get to the stories around slavery, around racism, the closer we get to getting those stories out, and then the other side wants to pull back. So now we have this issue, critical race theory, CRT. Do you think we're going to get past that and the real history can be taught so children don't go into their lives blind like a lot of us did?
I think as long as we keep trying to tell history, his story, then yeah, we will keep getting caught up. I think more people, the real educators, the people who know how to teach, the people who actually care about teaching, will start to tell true story, the real history. And they just won't call it CRT. CRT is too tainted, and certain people have their own agendas to get rid of it. They don't want the truth out there. They want to keep having people, lied to and censoring the way history is taught. So they will shut it down. I think they will keep trying to stop CRT, but those people who have real hearts and are really educated and smart will continue start trying to teach more of the truth about what has happened in this country. They just may not call it CRT, but hopefully more truth and more stories like this and my story will continue to get out there, because people are accepting more now and people are more woke than they have been in the past. We still got a lot of work to do. You can look around our country to see that we still have a lot of work to do, but unfortunately, we're making baby steps. Hopefully, I wish there would be leaps by now, but we're still taking our baby steps to get there. So hopefully, one day more true stories will come out.
Indeed, it's my opinion that a lot of that, now it came from our former president, Donald Trump, starting this fake media, fake news. And the same thing that Putin is doing in Russia is what Trump wanted to do to us. Putin is promoting to his audience, because he runs the news networks. he doesn't actually physically run them, but he tells them what they can report and what they can't. So he has blanked out the stories about really what's going on in Ukraine. He's saying that, you know, we just went over to Ukraine because we were trying to protect Russia, and you know the real story is not getting out, and people really don't know what happened there. So, but Donald Trump follows a lot of that theory. Tell them the fake story. They're the fake stories, and people really in Russia don't know. But some people are becoming awoke, and they're telling now. They
Yeah.
understand what really is going on.
And that's why it's important for all of us to be part of this. This is not just a thing that the Black community needs to do. This is something that everyone needs to do. If you're silent, you're part of the problem. You have to speak up. You have to tell the truth when you know the truth. You see something, say something. And if you know something, say something as well. So it's all of our mission as human beings to help in the racism, the segregation, discrimination that's going on in our country. We all have our part to do. Don't just be silent, because if you are silent, then you're agreeing with the issue and the problem, and you're not helping move us forward as a people. And it's up to all of us, as we said earlier, to use those words that Jefferson said, all men are created equal, to really make that a reality today.
Indeed. If you had a chance to ask a question to Sally Hemings, your grandmother, what would you ask her?
It used to be. I want to know more about the dynamics that went on at Monticello between her, between Jefferson, between other slaves. You know, I want to know, because we can kind of guess from other plantations, but I want to really know specifically, how was Jefferson's plantation? What was he like? And what was the dynamics like? Because, you know, some people believe that there was, you know, nighttime integration, where during the day you did your job, you know, didn't talk, you know, kept your eyes forward, but at night everybody knew who was who, and this intermingling that was going on at the plantation. Obviously it was known whose children were whose, and also what, you know, how much power did she have, how much power did other slave women have on the plantation. You know, I've seen some accounts of where the slave women did have more power than people gave them credit for, and were, you know, strategic in the way that they use their power on the plantation, whether that be from the, you know, against the slave master or with other slaves as well. So I would just be curious about more of the dynamics, you know, that were going on, and her relationship with Jefferson. You know, was it rape? Was just straight rape? Or did she have, you know, Stockholm syndrome at some point, and she was just like, look, let me just get it over with and get out of it what I can get out of it? You know, what was that dynamic, and how did she mentally handle it in her own mind? Again, she was so young when it started, and she had seen it happen to her mother and other women around her. So was it just like, hey, if it's going to happen, it might as well be with the slave master instead of an overseer or something like that? You know, what was that dynamic? So I would just be interested in more specifics to that.
And what about Thomas Jefferson himself? What would you ask your grandfather, Thomas Jefferson?
Mm.
What would you ask him about? We hold all these truths to be self-evident. That all men
Well,
are
I know
created.
that I know that he was a hypocrite and a coward, so I know sort of the answer to some of that stuff, because he could have did more and didn't, and he was selfish because he did not want to free his slaves. He liked that free labor. He liked living the lifestyle that he was living. So I know the answer to a lot of those questions, but I would like to ask him some of that same dynamics stuff, or what the dynamics were, and, you know, what was he so afraid of? Was it just straight greed? Was that the situation there? Is that why he didn't do more to free slaves? Because he was just greedy? What was it? And how, you know, and just the whole mindset of how you can own these people. And, you know, I don't know, it's complicated, but you know how some people, it's just like, yeah, you say some people aren't human, or they're, you know, not people, but yet you have children with them, they nurse your children, and you have relationships in your mind with these people, and you have feelings for these people, because clearly he had feelings for Sally. So I don't know how he justified it in his head, but that's another thing I want to know, how you justified this in your head, like, you know, because you knew it was wrong, but yet you still did it. So I don't know. So either way, it'd be a long counseling session after that.
But you know, it's interesting that we can look at this situation, and Thomas Jefferson is not the only one. Now, you know, I mean, we got descendants of all of them that were president, from the long line from Washington all the way up. And then there are those
Mhm.
that were Black themselves that were able to slip in and pass and become president. And a lot of that information is coming out today, too. So hopefully I get to interview somebody else's grandson or granddaughter one day.
So true, so true. We'll see. Yeah, I tell people if you do some of the research, you might be surprised at who you're related to. So do some of the
Absolutely.
research, find out who you descend from, and then all the ethnicities that could be in your background. I was so shocked when I did Ancestry.com to find out all the different dynamics that make up who I am.
Indeed. And I know your children are hearing the story right now. You talk to them about this, right?
Oh yeah, all the time. I just want them to know their heritage and their past, but I also talk to them not as much about Thomas Jefferson anymore. I do know they think it's cool that they, are related to a president, but I talk to them about, the enslaved people and how we come from the strongest people that ever lived on this planet, that they can endure the unthinkable and still come out survivors. They can give their blood, sweat, and tears and still give their all. And the testament to us being alive today and knowing who we are shows the strength of our ancestors. So we don't just come from enslaved people, that we come from kings and queens as well, that we come from a greater thing than just, our story didn't start in the United States. It didn't start in slavery. It started way before that. And so I try to get them to understand the strength and the pride that comes from their ancestors and all that they went through throughout their lives, that we should not complain about our simple things that don't go wrong that don't go right in our life today because of all our ancestors had to go through. I don't think any of us would survive slavery on our little posh lives that we live now, because they really went through some stuff. So maybe we shouldn't complain so much about our daily lives and we think about all our ancestors went through. But it's important for me to make sure that they know that we come from royalty and they are royalty.
Shannon, I want to thank you for joining us this morning on Straight Talk Live.
Thank you for having me. Y'all be blessed.
How successful was Shannon Lanier in reuniting his Black and white family? Shannon played a significant role in reuniting the descendants of Thomas Jefferson's family, including those mixed race from his relationship with Sally Hemings. His efforts, along with those of his cousin Lucian Truscott, helped bring together the white and Black descendants of Jefferson at Monticello, Jefferson's Virginia plantation. Overall, Shannon Lanier's efforts were quite successful in fostering a sense of unity and understanding among the descendants of Thomas Jefferson's family. It was a significant step towards reconciling with the past and bringing to light the intertwined histories of the families involved.
Thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Live with renowned radio pioneer Edna Howell-Parrish, the program dedicated to presenting thought-provoking issues and opinions with the goal of challenging listeners to re-examine their assumptions and expand their opinions and give thought to new ideas and concepts to better their lives and the lives of others. Join us next week for another opportunity to participate in making the world better. So until next week, live your best life from your friends at Straight Talk Live and host Edna Howell-Parrish.